Hey everybody, thanks for joining me today on Classic Mini DIY. Today we're going to be talking about a little bit of regular maintenance on your Mini. On these old Minis, you have a lot of regular things that you wouldn't normally have to do on a newer car. One of those things is greasing all the pivot joints on your suspension. As you're driving the car, as you use it, the pivot joints are going to get worn out, or they're just going to become less lubricated, which means you're going to get creaks, you're going to get snapping, popping noises all over the car. So to prevent that, we need to grease all these joints. So in this video, I'm going to show you exactly what joints you need to grease, how to grease them, and the grease that you need to be using for this job. It's a pretty straightforward video, shouldn't be too complicated. Let's go ahead and get started. Now the first thing that we're going to need to touch on is what kind of grease gun you're going to need. Any grease gun with a standard 1/4 inch UNF grease fitting is going to fit perfect. You're not going to have any problems with your grease nipples, and they should take grease without any issue. One thing that I do want to stress is these grease guns with the adjustable hose right here are extremely beneficial on these old Minis. The grease nipple locations are really difficult to get to, and sometimes if you don't have one of these adjustable lines here, it's going to make it much more difficult. You might have to take the wheels off, or you might just not be able to get to it at all. So just if you can get yourself a grease gun that has this adjustable hose, it's going to help you a lot. There are all sorts of other grease guns, but this is my favorite kind. It works out great. Strongly recommended. I think it's just whatever Advanced Auto Parts sells standard. The next thing that you'll need is the actual grease for this grease gun. Now it's sold in canisters that fit inside this tube here, so this unscrews and there's an actual cartridge of grease inside this thing. And this plunger is what provides the pressure up in there, and then when you're squeezing this, you're pumping it out the grease gun. The grease that you're going to need for these grease fittings is standard chassis grease. You're not going to need anything that's really high temp, nothing like that. I would recommend getting some sort of synthetic grease, something that is going to stand up against water a little bit better than just a standard grease. So white lithium, anything like that would be a really great choice. I think the stuff that I'm using right now is just some standard grease I had left over, but moving forward I definitely recommend using a white lithium based grease or something synthetic. So let's go ahead and move out to the car and actually start greasing up these joints. Great, so now you know what kind of grease gun you need. The next step is to actually come up to the front of the car and start greasing these joints. There are 3 grease points on the front of your car that are important. First one, and the most important one, is the one that's attached to your top arm. Now your top arm has an axle that runs through right here and allows this top arm to move up and down as your suspension travels. So you'll see here, this is your bottom bump stop. That keeps your top arm from bottoming out. And then you have your upper bump stop, which keeps it from traveling too far upwards and hitting your suspension here, or your subframe. So that's our first grease point. You can see it right here. That's the grease nipple. And then you have 2 more grease nipples, one on the top of your hub assembly here, and that grease nipple's right here, where my pinky's touching. And then you have one on the opposite end of this hub assembly, so if on the exact opposite side underneath your disc brake or your drum brake, depending on what kind of car you've got. So next step, let's go ahead and get our grease gun connected to these fittings and start pumping it up. Alright, so you may be wondering, wait a minute, how do I know when I'm done greasing these joints? Well, you can tell on these top arm joints, you'll start to see grease come out the side here, which you can see it's already starting to do. But as you pump, you'll actually see grease pop out those sides. You can kind of see it in the video there. When you see that, that means that you've got enough grease coming out, or that you've got enough grease inside that joint, and you can go ahead and stop pumping. Now the same is true for the top of the hub assembly. Do the bottom one, and then that's it for the front of the car. It's pretty simple stuff. You are not going to need to take your wheel off in order to do this. I have my wheel off just so it's a little bit easier for me to show you guys exactly how to pump this up. But again, you don't need to do that on your car. You should be able to turn your wheel all the way to the right or the left, and you'll be able to access that grease point pretty easily. So let's go ahead and move on to the rear of the car. So once we're at the back of the car here, normally on most cars there is a small grease nipple on the end of your radius arm here, and the radius arm is the arm, the full metal piece that actuates this whole wheel moving up and down back here. And there's an axle that runs right here that requires grease and often will get creaky and kind of run a little low on grease. This also moves quite a bit like the front does. Anytime you hit a bump, you're going around corners, really all the time when you're driving. So on this back side, if you don't see a grease nipple on the outside here, it means that someone put your axle on backwards. So like on my car, I accidentally put my axle in backwards, so my grease nipple is actually on the inside, underneath the car. Sorry, not on the inside of the car, but on the inside face of the car. And I'll show that to you here shortly. But most people are gonna have a grease nipple right here, and you'll be able to put your grease gun right on the end here, squeeze it, fill that up, check for the edges just like you did on the front to see if you have any grease that's coming out the ends, and if you do, then you have enough grease on the back of your car. So let's go ahead and move under the car and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about with the grease nipple facing the inside. Alright, so now we're back underneath the car here, and as you can see, here's your battery line. This is your brake line right up here with the yellow ring on it, and then right next to it is the grease nipple that I was talking about. So this is normally facing outwards. However, on my car, because I put it on backwards, these grease nipples are facing inwards. So got to climb under here to grease those joints. So again, you just attach your grease gun to this grease nipple here, start pumping away, and then once you start to see grease coming out of the ends of the radius arm, which you can see outside on the outside of the car there, you should have enough grease. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright, that's it for Classic Mini DIY. Thanks for watching today. Like I said, that was a pretty short job, pretty easy to do. If you have any questions at all, feel free to post them in the comments section below. Otherwise, enjoy those minis and motor on.